So I'm experimenting with a formula that can remind me to refresh a pivot. Now it won't work for every case, but here what we have our raw data, these 4 columns, and it's a large data set. It's going down to 200 or 20,000 in this case, but I tested it earlier with even more records in it, and it works. So we have this large data set. We pick a region, a month, and we pick a department, and then what we want to do is only extract the data for the rows where these 3 things are true. So we're using a pivot table not to aggregate, but simply to display this data, because if we use formulas on even a larger data set, 200,000 or 300,000, you'd have many, many formulas. Now, to test this, like part of the solution, I have 2 helper columns. This helper column is putting a counter in when it meets those conditions. So let's pick something that we can see here. Let's pick West and June, and then that's going to be finance. So there's the 7, and then we have a true. So every time these 3 things meet our criteria, we get a number in here, and we also get true over here. So then I've taken that and I put this counter field over here because we have to have something unique here. We don't want the pivot to aggregate, and we don't want the pivot to give us only one row, because sometimes there could be several. Look at this, we have several rows that could be the same. So I'm not only putting region, month, and department in the row label area that you can see right here. I'm also taking the numerical field and putting it at the bottom right there. So you see it. The data part is you're going to see at the bottom of this list. So all the different fields are in here. So it's displaying all of them, even if we have, let's say, 2 rows. In this case, it's not true, but if 2 rows are identical, because of our counter, we still see all the rows just like they are displayed in our pivot. And then I have a little flag up here, a filter to say true. So that's looking at this column here. So now we have all of this information in here, but normally you never really know unless you get into VBA programming if the pivot has been refreshed. But what I've done here, and this is what the video is really about, I've got a formula that's going to tell us please update the pivot. So we come over here, right click, refresh our pivot, and now it tells us pivot is up to date. So it has been refreshed. So obviously if we go in here and pick something different, now we've got marketing June, and let's pick North. So once again, after about 1 or 2 seconds, it's going to tell us please update the pivot. So we come over here once again, right click, refresh it, and it tells us pivot is up to date. Now of course this won't work for everything because pivots can get very complicated, but in this case it's an interesting concept. So let's walk through this solution to show you how this works. So the formula is going to remind us to refresh the pivot. First of all, we're using a match array, which is something that Mike Girvin's video reminded me about just recently. So we take all of column H, all of these values, and you have to sort of know how far down to go. I put down to 2,000. So we're looking for all of these values in our counter column. So trying to match if every single one of these guys is in there, because this is dynamic, of course, right? It's going to change when we change these sort of input parameters. So we have that part. That's what step 1 does. This is an array formula, and if I highlight and press F9, it's probably going to be too long to show us. Yeah, the formula is too long. It can't show us everything. But inside of here, we're going to get a bunch of NAs and a bunch of numbers. So step 2. Now I'm going to put this function, the count function, around it to count how many numbers. So we've got 56 numbers. All right? That's how many are, in here that we find over there. How many numbers inside of our array. Step 3, now I'm putting at the end of this, I'm saying, does all of this equal how many the numbers in our counter, just to double check, sort of a double checking mechanism. And then finally, around the whole thing, I just put a very simple, see how long it looks now, but as we go through step by step, we just kind of break it all down. And I just put an if statement around it to say if this whole comparison, and here is our logical test, if this is true, which it is, then we want to see the pivot is up to date. But if it's not true, we want to see please update the pivot.